Hello and welcome back to Seagull Central. Thank you so much for tuning into the channel again, putting me on and getting involved with another video. Hey, well look, we're back in the new background. I think, there's been a bit of debate amongst you guys in the comments, in the community page, in the polls I've done around this. The poll came out at like 70% preferring this, but then I've had a few like direct messages and comments, people saying they prefer the old studio. Please get in the comments, let me know which one you prefer, because I'm agonising over it. I'm doing videos, flitting back and forth between the two. Realistically, it's going to be more about convenience when I want to jump on and do something quick and get my thoughts out reactionary and kind of doing something, live in the moment. This is going to be how I'm going to do it. And for the more longer form pieces where I've got a bit more time to plan and think, I'm probably going to jump on to the studio. So I hope you don't mind too much. I thought I would make a quick video in light of the kind of reports that are going around over the weekend that we saw around João Pedro's future and what this summer's kind of looking like for him. Obviously, it feels like the story around him has been rumbling on for quite a few weeks, maybe even a matter of months. He's been a player who maybe we all kind of expected would move on this summer. But with that said, it felt like in the last week or so, the last couple of weeks at least, that this story has really kind of gone up a level in terms of there being reports around him kind of directly requesting to leave the club, Igor coming out, making some comments. It's been quite soap, operatic about it. There's been real drama to it. And it feels like one of those where it's going to rumble on and on. You've got journalists weighing in. You've got Twitter saying everything about it. But I also just want to pull it back a little bit more and talk more generally around João Pedro, his role at the club, what he brings, what he lacks, what he's offered us, where we'd be without him, how we could maybe look without him, the extent to which we want to try and keep him. So yeah, I'm going to get into that real quick. If you haven't already, I know that there's 75% of people who watch my videos on this channel who don't subscribe. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. It means so much to me. It helps me out massively. And you get so much Brighton content coming out of your ears, whether you're a Brighton fan, whether you're not a Brighton fan, whether you like a particular player, whatever your view, I'm going to be here all throughout the summer, jumping on, reacting, analysing everything there possibly can be around Brighton and Hove Albion. So please, if you haven't already, hit subscribe. It helps me way more than you realise. And I really, really appreciate you and you watching and getting involved. It means a lot. So let's talk generally about João Pedro. I'm going to be really honest. I love the bloke. I think the guy is an amazing, amazing player. And I think this season he has actually been quite unfairly kind of, I don't want to say scapegoated because it's never been a situation where he's been kind of blamed for things going wrong. But it's felt like, it feels like he's been compared quite often to maybe like the kind of Trossard mould or the kind of like problem player mould a little bit. I remember it starting earlier on in the season when you see him doing the whole hands up to the crowd, to get the crowd going. Of course, you've had the incidents where he's kind of elbowed players. But I think a lot of heat has come his way from the fans, where fans have kind of decided that he's got this like attitude or he's got a problem or he's got some kind of issue. Not going to lie, I personally have no issue with any of that kind of thing. I think, okay, I actually probably would do it as well if I was playing a game. I needed the crowd a bit more on my side. I maybe would do that. Maybe some people find it, that kind of like South American petulance, a little bit annoying that you do often see from like young players, particularly from South America. However, I really like it. I think he's got the passion. And I think what's getting so overlooked is that utter talismanic ability that he's brought to Brighton during his time at the club. What's it been? This is the end of his second season here. He's been the top scorer in his first season, the joint top scorer last season, creates goals, brings players into play, takes penalties, leads the line. And when I use the word talismanic, I use it because I think he has that ability to come up in clutch moments, to in the big games against the big teams, to really set the tone for us. In a way that, last season we saw Jorginho Rutter be able to do quite well. Really capture the imagination of the fan base. But you think back to that first season in Europe last season, and João Pedro was the man. He was the guy that we were pinning all of our hopes to. There's three of these prints here that were done for, the three that I've got here are the AEK Athens game, the Ajax game, the Marseille game, the three home games, the three programmes from the home games in the group stage of the Europa League. The fourth one was obviously the Roma game. And which of the key players? They got three arguably of our best ever players here: Dunk, Matoma, and Gross. And who's the fourth one that they used for the Roma game? João Pedro. And it shows what an importance he has for us. So I do feel like he's been unfairly scapegoated a little bit. Look, to me, he's one of my favourite players of the modern era. And I think it's largely forgotten about the difficulty that Brighton had in terms of finding an elite level striker to take us to the next level for years and years and years, ever since we were in the Premier League, really since the Glenn Murray days, and even then before we had the conversation when we were trying to get out of the Championship. I feel like we've always had we need that striker, we need that striker. When we got to the Premier League, we were like, we need another Glenn Murray, we need the new Glenn Murray, we need a player who can get us 10, 15, 20 goals a season. And to be honest, he was the man. We were able to find him. And that was the player that was able to do that for us, João Pedro. And I feel like we're at the point where, because he's kind of flailed his arms around a bit and shown a bit of an attitude, that people are kind of really happy to see him go. For me, I think it's a really, really big loss. Despite the fact we have a lot of attacking options in our arsenal. Yes, we've got Rutter. Yes, we've got Costellas. We've got Simas. We've got Welbeck. We've got Minte. We've got all of these options, Matoma. I think having that focal point, but not like your traditional target man focal point, but a focal point who can link play so brilliantly in a very possession-based side, in a technical side, he is perfect. And I think that profile of striker will be quite difficult to find. Now, maybe the club think that someone like Costellas is a similar profile to that, purely the fact that he's not a kind of straight down the line target man striker like a kind of Ferguson or a Simas. It seems like Costellas does have a bit more of a string to his bow, but it's a total Premier League unproven element to it. I think when he does go, and I think inevitably João Pedro will go in the coming months, I think it's going to be a massive, massive loss to us, and I think he will strengthen really, really, really nicely whichever side he goes to. Now, there's reports that he might be going to Newcastle. I think that would be a really interesting fit for him. Obviously, you think back to a few seasons ago, it would have been 2022, 2023, when, everything seemed like it was lined up for him to go to Newcastle. He may have even, am I right in thinking he might have even failed a medical when he was going to go there? Everything was ready to go. Eddie Howe clearly really likes him. And I could see him really complementing the Newcastle attack. They can offer him Champions League football. They can offer him the prospect of winning a trophy there. I do think, though, if I'm João Pedro and I'm going to move on, do you want to move on to a Newcastle? Or do you want to try and move on to a Liverpool or a Man City or, a top European side who are going to be competing for titles? Now, I'm sure if there's any Newcastle fan watching this, they'll be saying, well, that's our aim eventually. And I get that, but I think the only reason I would think it's a slight shame is okay, yes, he'd be getting Champions League football, but I kind of feel like João Pedro's ceiling is even higher than that. He could be part of a front three for Liverpool, 100%, no doubt. I could see, now they've brought in Wirtz, now they've revamped their side in a way in which they're probably not going to go for someone like João Pedro, particularly for the price that he'll command. However, I think that would be a really, really astute signing. For Brighton, I think, to be honest, it's something where I think we've all got to kind of be realistic, and I think we are at the point now where you do expect each summer a couple, minimum one, high-profile player to move on. I'd kind of assumed it would be João Pedro this summer just because he's a guy who scores goals in the Premier League. He's shown he can do it in Europe. He's 22 years old. And actually, in terms of a position on the pitch where I feel like we can kind of react well to it, you'd think up front with the varying options that we have that seems like that's one that we can deal with. I would probably rather keep someone like Carlos Baleba for another season than I maybe would João Pedro. However, my reticence to sort of say that is all the things I've said before is about the fact that I think he does have, I hate to use the phrase again, but that talismanic ability. He has the ability to change a game. He has the ability to take on players. A really, really unique profile, which when you're looking for kind of moments, in a difficult game, he is the guy. maybe we should go back and talk about the report that came out a few weeks ago around him and JP Van Hecke, and the report that obviously they got into a bust-up in training, and we didn't see João Pedro for the final 2 or 3 games of the season. JP Van Hecke came straight back into the side. We didn't hear of any disciplinary process for him. And it sounds like the club, probably in tandem with Fabian Hürzeler, kind of put the disciplinary sanctions in place. There was talk about it breaking the team ethic that the club have instilled, literally TEAM, the 4 values that the club, uses their pillars of values. They stand for something, can't quite remember. But to be honest, I do really like that. I think it's a shame. In one way, it's a shame because I think what it did was it really killed any idea of we might keep this guy into next season. It felt like in March, February, March time, you're kind of looking ahead to the summer, which players are going to go. You sort of think, well, João Pedro probably will be one of them. But then again, it could be a Baleba, could be, a Minte, it could be Mitoma. That moment flipped it for me, where it kind of immediately just felt like, look, this guy is going to be the guy that's gone. There have been underlying bubbling reports around his kind of personality and his attitude, and then something like this happened in training. The manager obviously takes a side of one player over the other, over you in João Pedro's case, and suddenly everything's a little bit different. You don't see him play in the final couple of games of the season. Then it really feels like the writing's on the wall. It chimes back to a kind of, do you remember that Trossard era with Roberto De Zerbi? You've seen it before, obviously, very differently, but this is just one of the examples that's coming to my head, like Andone and Graham Potter. You kind of feel like when a manager, maybe, or even like Aaron Connolly under Graham Potter, you heard of moments in training ground bust-ups where Aaron Connolly lost his head in training and stuff, and it felt like the manager makes a judgment on you then. And I think those incidents in training, when it really kind of hits the fan, I do think that sometimes it's quite difficult to find a way back from that, and we've seen it in the past, and clearly it's looking like that's going to be an example of it again. Out of the 2 of them, if you had to keep one, I don't know. If I could be guaranteed to keep one, I think it is interesting because obviously you've got Jan-Paul Van Hecke, who is our player of the season, who's our best defender at the moment, who, despite whatever signing we make, I guarantee will probably be our best defender next season, is destined for the very, very top. But if you had to pick one or the other in terms of playing ability, who would I rather in my side? You'd probably rather a goal scorer. I don't know. I feel like maybe a defender would be slightly more replaceable. But on this, that's kind of, me making that point is kind of pointless in a sense because there's no side that's right or wrong here. It's clearly obviously if the team values have been broken, if you feel like it's, letting down the culture of the club, these actions, you need to take those actions against him. What does kind of annoy me though is the extent to now in which we see all of the reports around his future on social media, leaking to the press. So we've heard Fabrizio Romano put his tweets out about João Pedro. Very soon after this disciplinary process came along, he was putting tweets out, clearly fueled by the agents, as we know Fabrizio Romano does, talking about how João Pedro has spoken to the club. He will be available this summer. Brighton will be looking to move him on. If the price is right, Brighton are prepared to sell. I just don't buy it. The idea that Brighton are briefing that kind of thing to anyone. They don't even brief that kind of thing to Andy Naylor, the club mouthpiece, let alone, Fabrizio Romano. That's clearly his agent realising, you know what, he spent 2 seasons at Brighton. He's ready for the next level. The player's obviously saying that as well. He's had this bust up with, a player. He's been disciplined by the club. It's all gone a bit sour. The manager's obviously said, look, mate, you have to sit out the last few games. We'll take it from there, from the summer. And the agent's, kind of running with that. And this is why I'm a little bit worried about the way that some of these transfer moves are going to go this summer. We're seeing it with Pervis Estupiñán, obviously speaking to the Ecuadorian press after the national team games. And it kind of feels a shame that I do just think it might get a little bit toxic. I think with all of the agent talk, with all of the social media leakings, with the kind of annoyance that I think a lot of fans have to Fabrizio Romano in terms of the way he's kind of auctioned off our players in front of the general public. It has been quite irritating over the years. I can imagine the João Pedro one's going to be the same. The only question I would ask is, apart from Newcastle, I maybe don't really understand where he would go. You see Liverpool kind of, solving their issues in terms of attack. You feel like the Florian Wirtz signing, whether it is a direct attacker or more of a midfielder kind of signing, they're probably not going to go and spend massive money on an attacking player again this summer. Man City, they seem pretty sorted in terms of having Haaland, Marmoush. Arsenal, I don't think that's a terrible signing for Arsenal. There's a lot of talk about Gyökeres. There's a lot of talk about Šeško. I think that João Pedro would be an absolutely brilliant signing for Arsenal. And maybe Arsenal fans would find it slightly annoying in the sense that he's maybe a bit more of the Gabriel Jesus mould, where it's like not quite a full-on striker. And you could imagine Arsenal getting a bit of heat for that, Arteta getting a bit of heat for that, for maybe not buying the right kind of player. However, I actually think it would be a really clever signing from Arsenal if they did go out and get João Pedro. I think what he could do to that side would be fantastic. The way he links play, the way he can be a real poacher, fox in the box kind of player, the way he's got the clutch moments in him, the way that he can score penalties and stuff. I think that would be a perfect signing. You just don't hear anything about him. He will absolutely be on their radar, but I'd be really interested to see if they make a move for him. Let's just say on the off chance that, Brighton don't get an offer for João Pedro this summer, and the situation in 2 months' time is that he's still at the club, a deal can't be agreed. How does it work? Does he then come straight back into the side? I think he probably does, but then there's a real issue to be had in the sense that Brighton then have like 5 strikers: Welbeck, João Pedro, Tsimas, Kostulas, someone else. Did I say Ferguson already? I feel like we've got so many, haven't we? So one of them's going to have to go, and it makes sense given everything that's happened, given the timeline that he's on in terms of how long he's been at Brighton, his trajectory, his age, the money spent. I feel like that's going to be the one that happens. I really hope that he goes with the goodwill of Brighton fans, and I just hope it doesn't become like a Moises Caicedo, Leandro Trossard situation where it rumbles on, it gets ugly. I think maybe because there's a bit of an expectation from Brighton fans that he's going to go, that kind of catching us off guard, making massive plays to make the move maybe won't happen as much. I think we all kind of expect this will be one that happens. So if we hear a bit of talk, if we hear all the reports, it's less of a shock to us. It's less of like, oh my God, this guy out of the blue nowhere is kind of like really trying to really force a move. But look, I've got a lot of love for João Pedro. I think he's a fantastic player. I remember speaking to a Watford fan a couple of years ago, just after we signed him, and I said, what's this João Pedro like? Obviously, we'd seen him a bit in the Premier League for Watford before they went down to the Championship. And he went, he's generational. He's unbelievable. He's absolutely unbelievable. He will come in and be your best player. And to be honest, for a long period, I think we can confidently say he was our best player. And, potentially now he even still is our best player. Obviously it's up for debate. But, I do wish him well. I think the club will get good money for him. I think they'll probably ask for, what would you say? I mean, I think in terms of what he brings, right, let's be honest, and his ceiling, it's probably maybe just below kind of like a Moises Caicedo. And you think of the fact he can score goals and stuff. I think it is probably over £100 million. However, I don't think that'll be what the club asked for him. I think, that's if the club asks for anything. You hear that the club don't actually necessarily set prices. I think he will probably, if he were to go, I think we'd be looking around like a £70 million kind of mark, which I think, for a player like that is really, really good value. And I think it's probably slightly cheap for a player like him. It would mean Brighton over double their money. It's another fantastic investment for them. And they hopefully, at least in terms of personnel, we don't know really yet in terms of quality with the new signings, but in terms of personnel, they will be covered. And they'll have made, 40, 45, 50 million quid profit, which would be absolutely fantastic. So let me know in the comments, what do you think is going to happen with João Pedro? If you were him, what would you do? If you were the club, what would you do? Do you think Fabian Hürzeler made the right decision in shunning him out at the end of the season? I would love to know your thoughts. As always, thank you so much for tuning into this video. It's been a bit of a brief one. I wanted just to jump on and kind of get the conversation going and hear your thoughts in the comments. Because this is going to be one that I'm sure rumbles on throughout the summer. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, leave a like and a comment below. I will see you on the next one. And as always, up the Albion.